"You killed him! You killed my husband!" Laura's voice cracked as she screamed the words, her hands shaking as she pointed at the man she'd trusted, the man she'd let into her bed, her home, her heart. Tom's face went pale, his charm finally cracking as sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Please, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see just how far our stories reach. To understand how Laura Bennett found herself in this terrifying moment, we need to go back 3 months to the worst day of her life. The rain hammered against the hospital windows as Laura sat in the sterile waiting room, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd been there for hours, ever since the call came in about the accident at the construction site. Michael, her husband of 15 years, had been crushed when a crane malfunctioned, dropping a steel beam directly onto him. "Mrs. Bennett?" The doctor's voice was gentle but grave. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." The words hit her like a physical blow. Michael was gone. Her strong, loving husband who'd built their dream house with his own hands, who'd kissed her goodbye that morning like he did every morning, was never coming home again. Laura barely remembered the next few days. The funeral arrangements, the endless stream of visitors, the casseroles that kept appearing in her refrigerator. It was all a blur of black clothes and sympathetic faces. But through it all, one person stood out. Tom Bradley. "Michael would want me to take care of you," Tom had said, his hand warm on her shoulder as they stood beside the grave. "He was my best friend, my business partner, your family to me, Laura." Tom was 45, with prematurely gray hair and kind brown eyes that seemed to understand her pain. He'd been Michael's partner in Bennett and Bradley construction for almost a decade, and he seemed to know exactly what Laura needed before she even asked. He handled the insurance paperwork, dealt with the business clients, and made sure the bills were paid while Laura struggled to function. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Laura told him one evening as they sat in her living room going through Michael's personal effects. "You've been so good to me." Tom reached over and squeezed her hand. "Michael made me promise to look after you if anything ever happened to him. I'm just keeping my word." Laura's neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, usually in the most caring way possible. Her next-door neighbor, Dorothy Hayes, had been watching the situation with growing concern. At 67, Dorothy had lived through enough heartbreak and drama to recognize when something didn't feel right. "I'm worried about Laura," Dorothy confided to her friend Janet as they tended to Dorothy's garden. "It's only been 6 weeks since Michael died, and she's already letting that Tom fellow practically live there." "People grieve differently," Janet replied, but she sounded uncertain. "Maybe she just needs the company." Dorothy shook her head, her silver hair catching the morning sunlight. "I've seen grief, honey. This isn't grief. This is something else entirely." What Dorothy had noticed, and what Laura was too devastated to see, was that Tom's comfort was becoming something more possessive. He was always there now, morning and night. He'd moved some of his clothes into Michael's closet, started parking his truck in Michael's spot in the driveway. When Laura's sister called from Portland, Tom would answer the phone and make excuses for why Laura couldn't talk. "She's sleeping," he'd say, or, "She's having a bad day. I'll tell her you called." But Laura wasn't sleeping in the middle of the afternoon, and she wasn't having bad days every single time her family called. She was being isolated, though she didn't realize it yet. The transformation from friend to something more happened gradually. Tom would hold her when she cried, stroke her hair when the grief overwhelmed her. He'd bring her favorite coffee from the shop downtown, the one with extra cream that Michael used to tease her about. He'd sit with her in the evenings, sharing stories about Michael, about their friendship, about the early days of the construction business. What Laura couldn't know was how well loved she'd been among Michael's construction crew. She had always made a point to visit the job sites, bringing homemade cookies and asking after the workers' families. She knew Danny's daughter was studying nursing, that Pete's wife was expecting their third child, that Carlos was saving money to bring his parents from Mexico. The crew had always seen her as more than just the boss's wife. She was someone who genuinely cared about their lives. "You know," Tom said one night as they sat on the porch swing Michael had built, "Michael used to worry about what would happen to you if something happened to him." He'd talk about it sometimes, especially after we got that big insurance policy. Laura looked at him with surprise. He never mentioned that to me. He didn't want to scare you, but he loved you so much, Laura. He wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of. Tom's voice was soft, almost reverent. He used to say that if anything happened to him, he hoped you'd find someone who could love you the way you deserve to be loved. I don't want anyone else, Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. I just want Michael back. Tom pulled her close, and for the first time since Michael's death, Laura felt a flicker of something other than grief. It was confusing and guilt-inducing, but it was also the first time she'd felt anything resembling comfort. Michael would want you to be happy, Tom murmured into her hair. He'd want you to live. From her kitchen window, Dorothy watched the scene unfold on Laura's porch. Something cold settled in her stomach. She'd been Michael's neighbor for over 10 years, and she'd never once heard him mention worrying about Laura's future. Michael had been the kind of man who lived in the present, who believed in facing problems when they came, not borrowing trouble from tomorrow. But there was something else bothering Dorothy, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It was the way Tom talked about Michael, as if he'd known him better than anyone else. But Dorothy remembered the early days of the business partnership, remembered Michael complaining about Tom's work ethic, his tendency to cut corners, his interest in the financial side of things rather than the actual construction work. He's more interested in the books than the building. Michael had told Dorothy once, years ago, when she'd asked how the partnership was going, but he's good with numbers and I need someone to handle that side of things. It hadn't sounded like a deep friendship then. It had sounded like a business arrangement. As summer turned to fall, Tom's presence in Laura's life became even more pronounced. He'd started sleeping in Michael's bed, claiming Laura had nightmares and needed the comfort. He'd taken over Michael's home office, saying he needed to keep track of both the business and Laura's personal finances. There's so much to handle, he'd explain when Laura questioned the arrangement. The insurance money, the business accounts, your household expenses. Michael left everything in such a mess, legally speaking. Let me take care of it all for you. Laura, still struggling with waves of grief that would hit her without warning, was grateful for his help. The financial aspects of Michael's death were overwhelming. Insurance claims, business contracts, tax implications she didn't understand. Tom seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. I think we should consider selling the house, Tom suggested one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork. It's gotta be hard for you being surrounded by all these memories. Laura's heart clenched. This house is all I have left of Michael. He built it for me. I know, sweetheart, but maybe a fresh start would be good for you. We could move somewhere new, somewhere that doesn't have all this sadness attached to it. The way he said we made Laura's stomach flutter with a mixture of warmth and guilt. When had Tom become such a permanent part of her future plans? I'm not ready for that, she said softly. Tom nodded, but there was a flash of something in his eyes that Laura missed. Of course, we'll take it slow. But Laura, I need you to think about your life insurance policy. Michael's death benefits will only go so far, and if something happened to you... What do you mean? I mean, accidents happen. Look what happened to Michael. If something happened to you, your sister would get everything, right? But she lives across the country. She doesn't know about the business, about what Michael would have wanted. Laura frowned. Tom, I'm only 40. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon. Of course not. But Michael wasn't planning on dying either. I'm just saying, maybe we should update your policy. Make sure the beneficiary reflects your current situation. It was a reasonable suggestion, delivered with Tom's usual gentle concern. But something about it made Laura uncomfortable, though she couldn't say why. Meanwhile, Dorothy had started her own investigation. She'd always been observant, and living alone for the past 15 years had made her even more attuned to the rhythms of her neighborhood. She knew when people came and went, when routines changed, when something was off. And something was definitely off about Tom Bradley's story. Dorothy had made a habit of walking her dog, Buster, past the construction site where Michael had died. It was a detour from her usual route, but she told herself she was just paying her respects. The site had been cleaned up weeks ago, but there were still flowers and a small memorial someone had placed near the fence. On one of these walks, she'd struck up a conversation with Jerry, the security guard at the office building across the street. "Terrible thing about Michael Bennett," Jerry had said, shaking his head. "Such a good man. Always waved when he drove by." "It really was," Dorothy agreed. "His partner Tom is taking it hard too. They were such close friends." Jerry's expression shifted slightly. "Tom, the older guy with the gray hair?" "That's him." "Huh. I wouldn't have guessed they were close friends. I used to see them arguing pretty regularly when they'd both be at the site early in the morning. Seemed like there was some tension there." Dorothy's heart skipped. "What kind of arguments?" "Oh, you know how it is with business partners. Money stuff usually. I remember Tom yelling at Michael about insurance policies and business valuations a few weeks before the accident. Something about Michael not understanding the bigger picture." This was news to Dorothy. Tom had painted himself as Michael's devoted friend, but Jerry was describing a relationship that sounded much more complicated. "Were they both there the day of the accident?" Dorothy asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Jerry nodded. "Michael was there early, like always. Tom showed up maybe an hour later. I remember because he seemed agitated about something. He went straight to where Michael was working on the crane." Dorothy felt a chill run down her spine. "Did you tell the police about this?" "They never asked. The investigation was pretty straightforward. Equipment malfunction, accidental death. Happens more often than you'd think in construction." That night, Dorothy sat in her living room staring at the wall that separated her house from Laura's blank spiklers, Lax Patience 70 Tunaid. Through the thin walls, she could hear Tom's voice, low and soothing, and Laura's occasional responses. They sounded like a couple settling in for the night, but all Dorothy could think about was Jerry's words about the arguments, about Tom being at the site that morning. She was still mulling over what to do when her nephew Jason arrived for his monthly visit. Jason worked as a private investigator in the city, and Dorothy had always been proud of his work helping people find missing persons and uncover fraud. "Aunt Dorothy, you look worried about something," Jason said as he settled into his usual chair with a cup of coffee. "Just neighborhood drama," Dorothy replied, but her voice betrayed her concern. "What kind of drama? You know, I deal with all sorts of suspicious situations in my work." Dorothy looked at her nephew's kind professional demeanor and made a decision. "Jason, what would you say if I told you I thought someone might have murdered my neighbor's husband?" Jason set down his coffee cup, his expression growing serious. "I'd say tell me everything you know." For the next hour, Dorothy shared her observations about Tom's behavior, the inconsistencies in his stories, and Jerry's account of the arguments at the construction site. Jason listened carefully, asking pointed questions that showed his professional training. "Aunt Dorothy, I think your instincts might be right. Would you like me to look into this Tom Bradley character?" "Could you? I'm so worried about Laura, but I don't want to sound like a paranoid old woman." Jason squeezed her hand. "You're not paranoid, you're observant, and in my line of work, I've learned to trust people who notice when things don't add up." The next morning, Dorothy decided to pay Laura a visit. She found her neighbor in the garden, half-heartedly weeding the flower beds that Michael had planted. "How are you holding up, dear?" Dorothy asked, settling onto the garden bench beside Laura. Laura looked up, and Dorothy was shocked at how thin and pale she'd become. "Oh, you know, some days are better than others." "Are you eating enough? You look like you've lost weight." "Tom's been making me coffee and breakfast every morning, but I just don't have much appetite lately." Dorothy filed this information away. "That's sweet of him. He's been very attentive." "He has." Laura's voice was soft but troubled. "Sometimes I feel guilty about how much I've come to depend on him. It's only been 3 months since Michael died." "There's no timeline for grief, sweetheart, but it's important to make sure you're taking care of yourself." Laura nodded, then looked around the garden with sad eyes. "Tom thinks I should sell the house. He says it's too much for me to handle alone." "What do you think?" "I don't know. This place has so many memories, but maybe he's right. Maybe I need a fresh start." Dorothy chose her words carefully. have you been in touch with any of Michael's other friends? His crew from the construction site? Laura shook her head. Tom's been handling all the business stuff. He says the guys are still too upset to talk about what happened. This struck Dorothy as odd. In her experience, construction workers were like family. They'd want to check on their boss's widow, share memories, offer support. What about the insurance investigation? Have they finished looking into the accident? Tom says it's all settled. Equipment failure, just like they thought. He's been dealing with all the paperwork. Dorothy nodded, but her mind was racing. Every detail Laura shared painted a picture of a woman being systematically isolated and controlled. After leaving Laura's house, Dorothy made a decision that would have made her son Kevin very nervous. She drove to the construction site where Michael had died. The site was active again, with a new crew working on the project Michael had started. Dorothy approached one of the workers, a young man who looked like he might have worked with Michael. "Excuse me," she said, flashing her friendliest smile. "I'm Dorothy Hayes. I was Michael Bennett's neighbor." The young man's face softened. "Oh, Mrs. Hayes, I'm Danny. I worked with Michael for 3 years. He was a good boss." "I'm sure he was. I was wondering, have you or any of the other guys been in touch with his wife Laura? I know she'd love to hear from people who knew Michael." Danny's expression grew confused. "We've tried calling her, but that guy Tom always answers the phone. He says she's not ready to talk to anyone from the crew yet." Dorothy's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Tom's been answering her phone? Yeah, for weeks now. We wanted to give her some of Michael's personal stuff from his office, but Tom said he'd handle it. "What kind of personal stuff?" "You know, photos, his coffee mug, some papers he kept in his desk. Tom came and cleaned out everything the day after the funeral." Dorothy thanked Danny and walked back to her car, her mind spinning. Tom had moved quickly to cut off Laura's contact with Michael's crew, the very people who might have been able to provide emotional support or information about the accident. That evening, Dorothy sat in her kitchen, staring at her phone. She'd promised Kevin she wouldn't do anything stupid, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Laura was in immediate danger. The background check results came back 2 days later, and they were damning. Tom Bradley had a history that Laura knew nothing about. 3 previous relationships with women who died under suspicious circumstances, 2 life insurance payouts that had made him wealthy, followed by moves to new towns and new identities. "Dorothy, this guy is a serial killer," Jason said when he called with the results. "We need to call the police immediately." "What about Laura?" "She's living with him. She's in danger right now." "All the more reason to call the police." But Dorothy had a better idea. "Jason, can you get me some recording equipment? Something small that Laura could wear without Tom knowing?" "Dorothy, no. This is too dangerous. If we call the police now, they'll arrest Tom, but they might not have enough evidence to convict him. He's smart, Jason. He's been getting away with this for years. We need him to confess." Jason sighed. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Maybe, but I'm not going to let him kill Laura." The next morning, Dorothy knocked on Laura's door. Tom answered, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Dorothy, how nice to see you. Laura's resting right now." "Actually, Tom, I was hoping to talk to you about the construction business." Tom's expression shifted slightly. "Oh? What about it?" "Well, I've been thinking about having some work done on my house, maybe an addition. I thought you might be interested in the job." Tom stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "I'm not really taking on new projects right now. I'm focused on taking care of Laura." "Of course, it's just that Michael always spoke so highly of your work. He said you were the brains behind the operation." Something flickered in Tom's eyes. "Michael said that?" "Oh yes. He was always praising your business sense, your attention to detail. He said you understood the big picture better than anyone." Tom's chest puffed up slightly. Michael was a good man, but he was too trusting, too willing to let people take advantage of him. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know, clients who didn't want to pay, suppliers who tried to overcharge, the insurance company that tried to lowball us on coverage. Michael would have just accepted whatever they offered, but I made sure we got what we deserved." Dorothy nodded encouragingly. That's smart. A business needs someone who can think ahead, plan for contingencies. Exactly. Michael never understood that sometimes you have to take control of your own destiny. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Tom becoming increasingly comfortable sharing his philosophy about taking what you deserve and not waiting for life to give you opportunities. Dorothy filed away every word, building a picture of a man who justified his actions through a twisted sense of entitlement. After leaving Tom, Dorothy went straight to Laura's back door. She found her neighbor in the kitchen, looking pale and nauseous. "Laura, honey, are you feeling all right?" Laura looked up with tired eyes. "I've been feeling sick to my stomach for the past few days. Tom thinks it might be stress." Dorothy's blood ran cold. "What kind of sick?" "Just nauseous, dizzy. Tom's been making me special tea to help with it." "Laura, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I think you're in danger." Laura's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Dorothy sat down beside her and took her hands. "I've been doing some research on Tom Bradley. He's not who he says he is." For the next hour, Dorothy shared everything she'd learned. Jason's background check, the suspicious deaths of Tom's previous partners, the evidence that Michael's accident might not have been an accident at all. Laura listened in growing horror. "That's impossible. Tom loved Michael. He's been taking care of me." "Laura, look at this." Dorothy pulled out her phone and showed Laura a video clip. "This is security footage from the morning Michael died. It shows Tom at the construction site 20 minutes before Michael usually arrived." Laura stared at the grainy footage in shock. The timestamp clearly showed Tom near the crane that would later kill her husband. "Laura, I think he's been drugging you. Those symptoms you've been having, the fatigue, confusion, nausea, they're consistent with prescription drug overdose. Small doses, administered over time." Laura's face went white. "That's impossible. Tom loved Michael. He's been taking care of me." "Think about it. Has he been giving you any medication? Pills for anxiety or grief?" Laura's hand flew to her mouth. "The vitamins. He brings me special vitamins every morning, says they'll help with the stress and grief. But I've been feeling so tired, so confused lately. We need to call the police." "Number?" Laura's voice was surprisingly firm. "If we call the police now, he'll know we're on to him. He'll run and we'll never be able to prove what he did to Michael." Dorothy stared at her neighbor in surprise. "Laura, what are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to catch him. We need to get him to confess. That's too dangerous." Laura stood up, and for the first time since Michael's death, Dorothy saw steel in her spine. "He killed my husband. He's been systematically taking over my life, isolating me from my family and friends. He's been poisoning me. I'm not going to let him get away with it." Dorothy realized that the broken woman she'd been worried about was gone, replaced by someone who'd found her strength in the face of ultimate betrayal. "Okay," Dorothy said. "Then we're going to need help." Jason wasn't happy about the plan, but he agreed to help. He provided Laura with a small recording device that looked like a jewelry pendant, and he positioned himself outside the house with a cell phone, ready to call the police at the first sign of trouble. The plan was simple. Laura would confront Tom with just enough information to make him think she was starting to figure things out, but not enough to make him realize she knew everything. The goal was to get him to confess, or at least to reveal enough details that the police would have probable cause to investigate further. That evening, Laura sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee Tom had brought her. He was in the living room, watching television and presumably waiting for her to drink it. "Tom," she called out, her voice carefully modulated to sound confused rather than accusatory. "Can you come here for a minute?" Tom appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I've been thinking about what you said before, about Michael worrying about what would happen to me if something happened to him." Tom sat down across from her. "What about it?" "It's just that I've been going through some of Michael's papers, and I found something that doesn't make sense." Tom's expression didn't change, but Laura noticed his hands tighten slightly on the table. "What kind of something?" "There's a letter from the insurance company, dated 2 weeks before Michael died. It talks about a conversation with you about increasing the coverage on his policy. This was partially true. Laura had found such a letter, but what she didn't mention was that the letter had been hidden in Tom's things, not Michael's. I don't understand, Tom said carefully. According to this letter, you called the insurance company and told them that Michael wanted to increase his life insurance policy to $2 million, but Michael never mentioned that to me. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Michael asked me to handle it. He didn't want to worry you. But Tom, the letter is dated 2 weeks before he died, and it mentions that you also inquired about the company's accidental death policy. Plus, I found this. Laura pulled out her phone and showed Tom the security footage Dorothy had discovered. This shows you at the construction site 20 minutes before Michael arrived that morning. Tom stared at the phone screen, his face cycling through surprise, calculation, and finally, a cold hardness that she'd never seen before. His shoulders sagged slightly. Well, I guess there's no point pretending anymore. So you did kill him? Tom laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Michael was going to ruin everything. He found out about the insurance policy changes, about the money I'd been moving around in the business accounts. He was going to expose me. So you sabotaged the crane. It was easier than I thought it would be. A few loose bolts, some hydraulic fluid in the wrong place. Michael always got to the site early, always worked alone until the crew showed up. All I had to do was make sure I was there to witness the accident. Laura's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to keep talking. And then you moved in on me. You made it so easy. You were so grateful for the help, so willing to let me take care of everything. All I had to do was be patient, let you fall in love with me, and then. Well, grief makes people do unpredictable things. Sometimes they even take their own lives. But you were drugging me. Tom shrugged. Insurance companies are suspicious of suicide. But a heart attack? A stroke? Those things happen to people under stress. And overdosing on heart medication looks like natural causes, especially when someone's been under tremendous grief. Laura felt sick, but not from the poison. The man she'd trusted, the man she'd let into her bed, had been systematically planning her murder. You're insane, she whispered. I'm practical. Do you have any idea how much money you're worth, Laura? The life insurance, the business, this house, your savings, Michael set you up very well. It would be a shame to let all that go to waste. People will be suspicious if I die so soon after Michael. Tom smiled, and it was the most chilling thing Laura had ever seen. People will think you couldn't live without your husband. A tragic love story, very romantic. You won't get away with this. Won't I? I've gotten away with it before. Laura's blood ran cold. Before? Did you really think you were the first, Laura? There was Jennifer in Phoenix and Patricia in Denver, both tragic accidents, both left me very well provided for. Tom stepped closer, and Laura realized with horror that he was no longer pretending to be the caring, gentle man she'd thought she knew. But you know what, Laura? I actually grew fond of you. You're prettier than the others, and you have a sweetness about you that I'll miss, so I'll make it quick. Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. These are concentrated heart medication, much stronger than the vitamins I've been giving you for the past year. You'll fall asleep peacefully and never wake up. Laura's eyes widened. A year? You've been drugging me for a year? I started planning this 18 months ago, Laura. The medication, the insurance changes, even becoming Michael's friend, it was all part of the plan. Tom moved toward her, but Laura was ready. She grabbed the coffee pot from the counter and threw it at him, the hot liquid splashing across his chest and face. He screamed and stumbled backward, giving Laura the opening she needed. You killed him! She screamed, making sure the recording device picked up every word. You killed my husband! Tom wiped coffee from his eyes, his face twisted with rage. You stupid bitch! You think you can outsmart me? I think I already have. That's when the sirens became audible in the distance, growing louder by the second. Tom's face went white as he realized what was happening. You called the police. I didn't have to, they've been listening to everything. Tom lunged at her, but Laura was already moving toward the back door. She burst outside to find Jason waiting with his cell phone in his hand and Dorothy running across the yard. "Are you okay?" Dorothy called out. "I'm fine," Laura replied, but her voice was shaking. "Did you get it all?" Jason nodded grimly. "Every word. The police are already on their way." Through the kitchen window, they could see Tom frantically searching for something, probably looking for a way to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The house was surrounded. The police arrived within minutes, and Tom was arrested without further incident. The recording device had captured his full confession, and the evidence Dorothy and Jason had gathered provided additional support for the charges. As Tom was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Laura with eyes full of hatred. "You think you've won?" he called out. "But you'll never feel safe again. You'll always be looking over your shoulder." Laura looked him straight in the eye. "Maybe, but at least I'll be alive to do it." The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Tom Bradley's crimes. He had indeed murdered at least 3 women over the past decade, each time using a similar pattern of seduction, isolation, and eventual drug overdose. The authorities in Phoenix and Denver reopened their cases, and Tom was eventually charged with multiple counts of murder. The investigation also uncovered how Tom had obtained the prescription heart medication used to poison Laura. He had been blackmailing a clinic worker who had once taken drugs to give to patients who couldn't afford their medications. When the worker discovered Tom's true intentions, they cooperated fully with authorities and provided crucial evidence about the poisoning scheme. For Laura, the weeks following Tom's arrest were a mixture of relief and trauma. She had to testify at multiple hearings, undergo medical evaluation to ensure her recovery from the medication effects, and come to terms with the fact that she'd been living with her husband's killer. But she wasn't alone. Dorothy became more than a neighbor. She became a true friend, someone Laura could count on when the nightmares came, or when the legal proceedings became overwhelming. Jason helped her understand the complex financial mess Tom had created, and slowly, Laura began to rebuild her life. The construction business that Michael had built was in shambles, but Laura surprised everyone, including herself, by deciding to save it. She hired a new manager, learned the basics of construction management, and slowly began to rebuild the company's reputation. When Danny and the other crew members heard that Laura was trying to save the business, they didn't hesitate to return. They remembered how she used to visit the job sites, how she'd ask about their families and bring homemade treats. She'd been more than just the boss's wife to them. She'd been someone who truly cared. Now it was their turn to support her. "Michael would be proud of you," Dorothy said one evening as they sat on Laura's porch, watching the sunset. It had been 6 months since Tom's arrest, and Laura was finally starting to look like herself again. "I hope so," Laura replied. "I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what he meant when he used to say that the most important thing in any building project is having a strong foundation." "What do you mean?" Laura smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "I mean that I spent so much time grieving what I'd lost that I forgot to appreciate what I still had. My health, my home, my memories of Michael. Most importantly, I forgot that I had people who cared about me." Dorothy reached over and squeezed Laura's hand. "We all need reminding sometimes." "You saved my life, Dorothy." "Literally, if you hadn't been paying attention, if you hadn't trusted your instincts." "Hey, that's what neighbors are for," Dorothy said with a grin. "Besides, you saved yourself. I just provided some backup." Laura laughed, a sound that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "Jason helped too. Where is he tonight, anyway?" "He's taking his granddaughter to a movie, but he'll be by tomorrow to check on the security system installation." Jason had insisted on upgrading Laura's home security after Tom's arrest. "Better safe than sorry," he'd said, and Laura had gratefully agreed. The new system made her feel safer, but more importantly, it represented her commitment to protecting herself and moving forward. "I got a call from Danny today," Laura said, referring to one of Michael's former employees. "He wants to come back to work for the company." "That's wonderful. How many does that make now?" 7 of Michael's original crew have come back, plus 3 new hires. we're actually getting busy again." The revival of Bennett Construction had been one of the most healing aspects of Laura's recovery. Working with Michael's former employees, hearing their stories about him, learning about the projects he'd been passionate about, it all helped her feel connected to him in a way that was healthy rather than obsessive. "Mrs. Bennett," Danny had told her just last week, "your husband always said that good construction was about more than just putting up buildings. He said it was about creating something that would last, something that would shelter people and make their lives better." Laura had found profound meaning in continuing that work. Each house they built, each renovation they completed, felt like a way of honoring Michael's memory while also building her own future. The business side of things had been challenging at first. Laura had to learn about permits and contracts, scheduling and budgets. But she discovered she had a natural aptitude for the organizational aspects of construction, and the crew respected her genuine desire to maintain Michael's standards of quality and integrity. "I never thought I'd say this," Laura admitted to Dorothy, "but I actually enjoy running the business. It makes me feel close to Michael, but it also makes me feel like myself." "What do you mean?" "I mean that for so long I defined myself only as Michael's wife. Then after he died, I was just the grieving widow. But now I'm Laura Bennett, business owner. I'm building something that's mine." Dorothy nodded approvingly. "Michael married a strong woman. I think he always knew you had it in you." As autumn turned to winter, Laura found herself settling into a new rhythm of life. She worked at the construction office during the day, often visiting job sites and meeting with clients. In the evenings, she'd come home to a house that felt like hers again, not like a shrine to the past or a prison of grief. She'd kept some of Michael's things, his favorite coffee mug, which she used every morning, his reading chair where she'd sit with her evening tea, photos of their 15 years together. But she'd also made changes, painting the bedroom a soft blue instead of the beige Michael had preferred, and converting his workshop into a home office where she could work on construction plans and business paperwork. The nightmares about Tom had faded, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. Sometimes she'd wake up in a panic, remembering the cold look in his eyes when he'd confessed to Michael's murder. But Jason's security system helped, and so did the self-defense classes Dorothy had convinced her to take. "I never want to feel that helpless again," Laura had told the instructor on her first day. By the end of the 3-month course, she'd earned her certification and was encouraging other women in similar situations to take the class. The legal proceedings had finally concluded in early spring. Tom Bradley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Michael's murder, plus additional sentences for the attempted murder of Laura and the murders of his previous victims in Phoenix and Denver. The families of those women had reached out to Laura, and they'd formed an unlikely support network of people who understood the unique trauma of loving someone who'd been murdered by a trusted friend. "It's strange," Laura confided to Dorothy one day as they worked in the garden Michael had planted. "Sometimes I feel guilty for moving on, for being happy again, like I'm betraying Michael's memory." Dorothy stopped weeding and looked at her seriously. "Laura, honey, Michael loved you. Do you really think he'd want you to spend the rest of your life grieving?" "No, I guess not. Michael wanted you to be happy. That's why he worked so hard to build the business, to make sure you'd be secure. He wanted you to have a good life." Laura nodded, tears in her eyes but smiling. "You're right, and I think he'd be proud of what I've done with the company." "I know he would be." That weekend, Laura hosted her first dinner party since Michael's death. She invited Dorothy and Jason, along with Danny and 2 other employees from the construction company, and her sister who'd flown in from Portland. "This is so good," her sister Amy said, taking another bite of the roast Laura had prepared. "When did you become such a good cook?" "I had to learn," Laura replied with a laugh. "After Tom was arrested, I realized I'd been letting him do everything for me, cooking, shopping, paying bills. I decided I needed to become more self-sufficient." "Well, you've certainly succeeded," Jason said, raising his glass. "To Laura Bennett, survivor and business owner extraordinaire." Everyone raised their glasses, and Laura felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. This was what happiness felt like. Not the giddy euphoria of new love, but the deep contentment of being surrounded by people who cared about her, of knowing she could take care of herself, of having meaningful work to do. After dinner, as everyone sat around the living room sharing stories and laughing, Laura excused herself for a moment and stepped out onto the porch. The swing Michael had built was still there, and she sat down, looking up at the stars. "I miss you," she whispered into the night air. "I'll always miss you. But I'm okay, Michael. I'm more than okay. I'm actually happy again." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree in the front yard, and Laura chose to interpret it as Michael's approval. When she went back inside, Dorothy was helping clear the dishes while the others continued their conversation in the living room. "Everything all right?" Dorothy asked quietly. "Everything's perfect," Laura replied, and she meant it. The next morning, Laura woke up early and made herself coffee in Michael's favorite mug. She sat at the kitchen table, looking over the plans for Bennett Construction's next project, a community center that would serve low-income families in the area. It was exactly the kind of project Michael would have loved, and Laura was determined to make it the best work the company had ever done. Her phone rang, and she was surprised to see Jason's number. "Jason? It's pretty early for you to be calling." "Laura, I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to run something by you. My friend just graduated from business school and he's looking for work. I know you've been handling all the administrative stuff yourself, but I thought maybe." Laura smiled. "Have him come in for an interview tomorrow. If he's half as good as his uncle, he'll be perfect." After she hung up, Laura realized that she was actively planning for the future, thinking about growing the business, expanding its reach. 6 months ago, she couldn't imagine surviving the next day. Now she was making plans for years ahead. The construction business wasn't the only area where Laura was rebuilding. She'd reconnected with old friends who'd been shut out during Tom's reign of manipulation. She'd joined a book club at the local library and had started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women who'd been victims of domestic abuse. "You have a unique perspective," the shelter director had told her. "You understand what it's like to be manipulated and isolated, but you also know what it takes to fight back." Laura found deep satisfaction in helping other women recognize the warning signs she'd missed, in teaching them that they were stronger than they knew. 1 year after Tom's arrest, Laura stood at Michael's grave with a bouquet of the wildflowers he'd loved. Dorothy stood beside her, offering silent support. "I brought you the first photos of the community center," Laura said, placing the pictures against the headstone. "Construction starts next month. Danny says it's going to be the most beautiful building we've ever put up." She knelt down and traced Michael's name with her finger. "I wish you could see it. I wish you could see all of it. The business, the house, how strong I've become. But I think maybe you can." When she stood up, Dorothy was wiping tears from her eyes. "He'd be so proud of you," Dorothy said. "I think so too," Laura replied. "And Dorothy, thank you for everything, for saving my life, for being my friend, for helping me become who I was meant to be. Thank you for letting me help. It's been an honor watching you rebuild your life." As they walked back to the car, Laura felt a sense of completion. Not the end of her story, but the end of one chapter and the confident beginning of another. 2 years later, Laura stood in the completed community center, watching children play in the bright, spacious rooms that Bennett Construction had built. The project had won several awards and had brought in more business than the company could handle. Laura had hired a full management team and was considering opening a second location. She was no longer the broken woman who'd been manipulated by a killer. She was no longer even the grieving widow who'd needed constant support and protection. She was Laura Bennett, successful business owner, community leader, and survivor. But most importantly, she was happy. Jason approached her as she watched the children play. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how much can change in 2 years," Laura replied. "Sometimes I can barely remember the woman I was when Tom was controlling my life." "That woman was always strong," Jason said, joining them with Dorothy close behind. She just needed to remember it. Dorothy carried 2 cups of coffee from the center's cafe. "The grand opening is going perfectly. Michael would be so proud. Laura accepted the coffee and smiled. You know what? I'm proud too. For the first time in my life, I'm really proud of what I've accomplished. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the community center, Laura Bennett felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. She'd survived betrayal, attempted murder, and devastating loss. She'd rebuilt not just a business, but an entire life, and she'd done it surrounded by people who truly cared about her. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. She was free to write the next chapters however she chose, and she planned to make them extraordinary. Thanks for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please consider leaving a like. This helps us reach more people. Always remember, you are stronger than you know.